One thing that stood out was the fact that we wanted this idea that the skybox, the starfield, the rotating sun, and then the sun hitting the interiors, we wanted them all to tie together so that it felt like one contiguous thing. That you felt like when you looked out the window, you saw the thing you were in. Because I feel like there's a lot of little cues that make people have that feeling, which is when they see that the sun is in the sky at a certain spot, and when they see it through the window, and then they notice that the angle of the shadows in the sun and the interior is the same, that connection would be really difficult to do with a tiny model. Because we'd have to do some kind of calculation between the tiny sun that is moving around the tiny model and the real giant sun that is moving around the interior spaces. And one of those things that fell out of it was that station is actually as big as a real space station. And that is a funny thing to do with your time.
So Tacoma's localized just like you would expect a game to be localized, in that it has subtitles. And I think the interesting part of the localization for Tacoma is the in-world aspect, where if you have your settings turned on to have AR overlays, then if you look at something like, for example, a magazine in a bunk, the text will appear translated into your given language as an AR overlay. So using the fictional AR technology as a way to show translations of text in the world.
And also, like, even just, like, in-world signage and stuff like that, where you just, like, translate it directly in the world, so people don't have to be like, what does that say? Let's turn on the overlay. It's just there.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you're seeing digital information the way that a character in the fiction might if they were just switching their, like, augmented reality rig's native language to Russian or Japanese or, what have you. I think that Tacoma does look really cool in other languages, because if you go into the language menu and swap, you just see the whole world. Like, if you're in the hub, you see the whole world change language. So I would encourage you to take a minute and try swapping the game into, like, Japanese and Korean and Russian, and just kind of see the world transform through the character sets that come up, because it's pretty neat. So Tacoma is a sci-fi game, obviously. It takes place on a space station in the future, but also it's very much a story about the lives of these people, these individuals who live here, and kind of about their everyday experience, as well as the drama of the crisis that they're living through. And so, the sci-fi stuff that we looked at that was really an influence on us had, at least in part, a strong focus on that kind of relatable experience of the people who are in these fictional worlds.
Yeah, there have been some really solid scenes that we could still draw from, especially in things like Alien. They have the waking up sequence, the dinner table sequence where everyone's talking and, coming from their different walks of life and relating to each other. And if we just cut it before John Hurt explodes, then everything is appropriate.
Yeah.
Then we have like Moon, which has long sequences of how a person could actually live their life.
And those were the kinds of things that we wanted to be able to talk about, was what are these people's lives like in a day-to-day way, so that you can kind of picture what it would be like to be here, or what it would be like to be in their situation, and kind of identify with that.
Totally.
Steve and Carla are really inspired by that scene around the dinner table in Alien. So I was thinking a lot about that scene, and I was like, well, how can we have our own little gathering table like that? and I drew a normal, like, rectangular table at first, and I was like, that's boring, so I put the little, like, weird tilted end on it, and Kate liked it, so she took it and, like, made it into a real table, which is what you can see in the game now, and I was always kind of excited about that. I was like, I designed a weird table! So the obsolescence day sticky letters are very unique because you can take one letter and put it back anywhere on the wall, whereas most objects with putbacks, you can only put them back in one spot, which is where you found them originally. But yeah, these sticky letters, you can sort of put them anywhere on the wall to spell out whatever you want, which is hilarious. And also, if you put them back a certain number of times, I think it's like 3 times, they lose their stickiness, and you can kind of tell because the sound kind of sounds like you're peeling off the letter from the wall, and like it falls off, and there's sort of a sound effect for that.
I was on a podcast recently talking about Tacoma, and they made me answer for that toothbrush that you made me build.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
They were like, well, you gotta explain yourself. Let's talk about that toothbrush and stupid future objects for a second. Because the idea behind a lot of the things that we built was we have sort of like a quotidian, like an everyday object. How can we make this worth picking up and worth turning over and worth, looking at?
Because, like, the thing is, if you just make the same, objects that you see every day, then it's kind of like, how is this in the future, right? And
right.
Well, the other thing is that Venturis being, so vastly corporate and opaque, can you imagine the companies that, like, they would have contracts with? You gotta imagine it's like those awful government contracts where they're like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, we made here's a bunch of toilet seats, I guess, or whatever, and they don't even have to, like, work or whatever. It's gotta be one of those things, right? Venturis doesn't know or care.
Yeah. So the skillet, the toothbrush, the soap bottle, was there anything else?
Oh, yes. There's just, like, a million objects that we look at them and we go, that thing sucks, I love it.
So the whole main scene in the dining room centers on this making and unveiling of Odin's cake, which he sort of neural networked together into something that he thinks that humans would kind of like to eat for this weird party he's throwing. So that's the cake in the game. It doesn't actually exist. It's just sort of implied sheet cake. But Sarah, for our lunch party, so you were responsible for actually making, like, reproducing the cake in real life, right?
Yes. I almost feel like I think in my head that it was going to be a lot funnier than it actually was. Like, I was very concerned about the look that I was going to get from a baker when I go in and say, hi, I need, like, a basic sheet cake in gray, and then with very specific red icing. But, yeah, she ended up being fantastic. I think we agreed right away that it needed to be some very clear store-bought sheet cake style. Nothing super fancy, because, again, you're supposed to be reproducing something that was made in the game.
Yeah.
She's like, got it. This is going to be great. Now, how big do you want it? And I feel like that was the biggest decision, was because the bigger it is, the more of a fun statement it makes as that reproduction cake. Yeah. Luckily, it turned out to be pretty delicious, and I think everyone enjoyed digging in.
Yeah, it was good. I loved it. But they said...
We're trying up.
So here we are in the lounge, my favorite place in the game.
Yeah, mine too, I
love
think.
it. I can't put my finger on that. Part of it is the pillows.
Yeah. Oh, so those pillows were kind of a nightmare to make, and the less I could see them at the end of the game, the better. Just because when I made those pillows, they weren't like sculpted or anything like that. I was using this program, which is like this. This is basically a sewing program, in that it allows you to make patterns in class simulation. So that you would, make like a pattern, like a traditional sewing pattern, and then it allows you to stitch it together. And if you have something like these pillows, it allows you to use a pressure slider, and it'll sort of inflate the thing you've stitched together. Except the problem is that I kept on just gently inflating them, and they kept like floating into the void, to the point where like every time that I tried to make these pillows, I would just lose them. They would just float away. So by the time that I was done making what should be a fairly simple model, because I was learning new software at the same time, I was like, I'm done with these pillows. And then someone put them on the lounge floor, so I had to see them every time I came in here, not just in the bedrooms. Do you want to talk about the pool table?
Oh, yeah.
Sigh.
Pool table. Yeah, well, no, I mean, I actually had a lot of fun making the pool table, which both of us worked on
Yeah.
quite a bit, because it is strange.
It's a fussy little beast.
The main reason it's fussy is this is actually just a physical pool table, and it works pretty similarly to a real pool table. When the pool balls go in the pockets, they actually have to fall on a ramp, and then that ramp rolls the ball and, drops it down into the ball return or to the cue return. A little ramp with a little tube, just like a real pool table. Which, if you're trying to make something deeply interactive and have the players engage or not engage with it, but at least it feels like it should, which is hopefully the bar you're trying to hit, is the player feels like that's legitimate. Like, I'm in a place and the pool table works as I would expect it to.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the pool table?
Oh, yeah.
Sigh.
Pool table. Yeah, well, no, I mean...
Do you want to talk about the pool table?
Oh, the darts.
The darts.
This dartboard had potentially more bugs than anything else in the video. I was still fixing bugs, the last night before release on this. It's just, there's so many states and so many confusing, unique features about this, with the, being able to put the darts back in the door, and then the door can move, and the door can be open or closed, and it can close on a dart that's stuck in the board.
You know what? We could have just made it so that it wasn't a cabinet, so that the darts were just stored underneath in a little rack or something, and then that would have solved so many problems for you.
Oh, don't say it now. Yeah, yes, we should have.
I remember when there was like one frame of the animations in admin in the kitchen where all the characters would like show up in the hallway outside between the kitchen and Evie's room, or the dining room, and they were all kind of in a group hug pile just like halfway through the floor.
I've run into loads, but a lot of them had to do with like the cat, for instance, in I believe it's like the cryo scene at the end, would just show up like 100 times the size it's supposed to be, which was really good. I don't know. Usually they're pretty minor fixes, but it's always a surprise. We're a cat-rich studio.
It's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of studios I've worked before, they're like dog heavy, but this is cat intense. Yes.
We have many a cat.
It's true. In Evie's bunk, we have all 3 of the cats from the development team, which makes it sound like they worked on the game.
They did.
Okay,
Tuco
fair
kinda
enough.
did. Well, he would hit the keyboard from time to time.
Amazing.
But yeah, we have a framed photo of Kate's cat Tuco, who in the game plays the part of Margaret Catwood, Evie's
Yeah.
cat. And then on the delicious cat food is my cat Delicious. And then the sweet puffy paw on that cat litter box belongs to Carla's cat Wednesday.
It's true. She's a paw model now.
The Tuco picture frame, originally when I made it, Carla, you'd asked for a picture frame model.
Yeah.
And then I had just kind of put that picture of Tuco in there as a placeholder, with the idea that eventually we would put actually something like relevant. Because at that time, there was no cats in the game.
Right. I remember.
And
Yeah.
then it sort of stayed in there, that picture, for a long time.
Mhm.
And then...
Up to the present.
Till the present, yeah. And then it just kind of, we just kind of kept it after a while. Even though it doesn't quite match the rest of the world, like with regards to art style, I kind of, like it.
It's great.
Yeah, it's great. And especially because Tuco unfortunately passed away during the development of Tacoma. But now every time I play this game, I can just go in there and look at this picture, turn it around.
Aw.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the song in Evie's fragment here in her bunk that she sings, and the actor Don Lewis sang it for real for us, and it was awesome. Is that all there is?
Yeah, the song is used memorably in Sleep No More, which is a theater production in New York where the audience shares the space with the performers and kind of follows them around and moves through the space with them. And that feeling of being inside of these scenes as they're happening and having the autonomy to follow different characters around and see what's happening in the events of the story from all these different angles and kind of reconstruct that as an individual was a big influence on us as far as what we wanted to do with our AR scenes. Our use of the song Is That All There Is our homage in a way to Sleep No More and their influence, and also fit the tone of where Evie is at as a character. So it all really came together for us.
ladies, you have everything you need? Yep-o. Don't even know if we're getting... All right, ladies.
I did learn to make some shaders, some custom shaders for Tacoma. So the character's look has changed a lot since we first started working on Tacoma. The story also changed a little bit, and originally there was a character that was supposed to look glitched and corrupt compared to the main characters. And when I made that character, I worked with vertex distortion, and so they look kind of wiggly as they're moving around. And it turned out that Steve and Carla really liked that look, and so we implemented that into all the other characters' shaders. So anyway, so that's why they kind of have like a distorted look as they're walking around. And from there, a bunch of other things were added, like when they walk through another mesh or touch another mesh. Like if they're touching the table, their fingers will kind of glow. And if they're walking through a door, their bodies will kind of glow as they're walking through the door mesh. So, yeah, good old shaders. I did learn to make some shaders, some custom shaders for Tacoma. So the character's look has changed a lot since we
We have a station cat.
Well, look, a cat.
Oh, hi. This cat, who belongs to Evie, is named Margaret Catwood.
That's right. Which you can find one of these cats in each of the main AR scenes. So the cat didn't have a name for a long time, and our rationale for that was that when you see the characters' name tags in AR, it's because the company is officially tracking them and has that information in their crew profile. And we knew that, you know, Venturis would want to know if there were creatures on the station like a cat. So it would be tracked in the system, but like Venturis doesn't care what the cat's name is. It doesn't have like a crew file about their cat. But then near the end of development, we put in a thing that
Right.
Nat had put in a list of what everybody was doing. We included the cat in that, and so
Because Nat.
right, because Nat's like she's a goof, and at that point it's like, all right, well, she's gonna put in the cat. She's not gonna just refer to it as like the cat. So I just went into our Slack channel and I was like, so what's the cat's name? And I think like 3 seconds later, Carla replied with just Margaret Catwood, and I was like, done.
I think that had been in the back of my head. I actually considered naming my cat that at one point, and then I was like, no, it's perfect for this.
That's very good. But yeah, it seemed like an appropriately silly name for the station cat.
We have a station cat.
Well, we were really glad that we did commit to recording all of the main scenes ensemble style
Definitely.
in person, because something that's really common in video game voice recording and in like animation voice recording is that you have each individual actor come in, sit in a booth, record their lines on their own, and then it all gets edited together after the fact. And we felt like because every scene in Tacoma is about these characters being face to face in these very intimate scenes, like the game is about being in the room with these characters while these moments are happening, the quality of the performance completely relied on the actors being there and being able to play off of each other's energy and be in physical proximity while these things were happening so it would come across in the game.
Yeah, in a lot of ways the whole game is conversational, and at least the scenes, and yeah, just having the actors physically present and able to talk to each other and look each other in the eye just added like immeasurably to the quality of the recording.
It was also really cool to see how excited the actors were to be able to perform their parts together in person on stage, because it's just an opportunity that I think in a lot of games and animation you just don't have the chance to be involved with, and so we really want to thank our voice coordinator, Michael Surix, who arranged all of the logistics of like getting a soundstage together and getting everybody in the same place at the same time, which is not easy.
All the way down to coming up with a scheme for taping the mics to the actors' foreheads so that they would get the least amount of interference from clothing and like skin movement as their faces moved while they spoke.
I mean, that's one of the big challenges, is that if you're recording a scene like this for the screen, you can have a boom mic that's just picking up everybody's lines. But with Tacoma, each character's voice has to follow their individual character model as they move around the space. And if I'm standing between Andrew and Sarah while they're talking, I have to hear Andrew out of my left ear and Sarah out of my right ear. So that means that Mike had to get over all of the logistical challenges of, we need to have people that are face to face, like inches away from each other, but also each of them needs to have only their own voice picked up and recorded and isolated separately so that they can follow the characters around in the game. So it was a big technical challenge and a really cool experience to get to see the scenes that we had written and practiced and kind of just done as amateurs in our studio being performed by these incredibly talented people there in front of us on a soundstage. It was really cool. In a game that uses traditional audio diaries, the shape of the space is still the shape of the story, because you go into a room and you find certain audio diaries, then you go into the next room and you find them, and so that is defining the progression of the story as you discover it. But in these AR scenes, they're multi-path, like different characters are moving all over the space in kind of a non-linear way.
And things are happening simultaneously.
Right, there's all this overlap where, two characters might be, in the gym together speaking, but one of them is talking on an AR call and the other one is in the locker room, and they're having two totally separate conversations, but then that have to take the same amount of time so that when their paths connect, they can then speak to each other and then split off again. And all of that stuff required us to, write to the space. Right. So the process was that like Nina and Tynan blocked out these spaces and put down where all the rooms were and what spaces we had to work with first before we wrote a single word. And then we had to say, okay, you've got the locker room, the gym, cargo. And so then who is where and what are they saying and how long is it going to take Evie to walk from cargo to Clive's office and what's he doing before she gets there? Because there is no... It doesn't matter what she's doing before he gets there because the player will never know. It's like the player can be there. Yeah. We have to fill in all of those spaces.
Right. He can't just sit there and wait for like the action to start happening. He has to do something. And so, and of course, when we tried to write all of this stuff out with like these parallel paths, we were totally unable to make everything match up until we physically acted out everything.
Yeah.
And did all the lines ourselves.
Yeah. It was a huge kind of experimental process, I guess, of first discovering how you write it, where you're like, okay, so you have to write each of the sections kind of as its own little scene and then make sure that they all link up. And then to test that, something that was great for us was that we actually had a similar sized development team to the size of the crew in the game. And so, yeah, we had to go from words on the page to actually doing basically like dry run rehearsals of it as a group, because you can't really know if the timing of everything lines up until you hear it acted out and you see how the characters moving in the scene are going to affect the timing of everything.
In our game, characters keep having to deal with something called corporate loyalty, which is the most nightmarish form of, like, value accrual we could think of.
Yeah, I mean, it's influenced by things that are going on now, things like Amazon Prime, for instance, where it's like, well, I'm already paying for Amazon Prime, and it gives me a discount, so I should probably just buy everything through Amazon forever.
Also, somebody totally tweeted a link to an article, like, yesterday about corporate universities.
Something that's interesting about releasing, like, a speculative fiction thing is that people start bringing you links to things that are like, so this is actually happening in reality now. And yeah, like someone tweeted us a banner ad that was like, unironically, like in our real world, like use company loyalty to pay for student loans.
Yeah.
And it's just like the degree to which things like the concept of corporate loyalty being the currency of people's everyday lives was conceived as being like a very broad extrapolation of something that's happening now becoming way too literal, way too fast is pretty freaky to encounter. Something that was really interesting to think about when designing these scenes was there are points in these scenes where there are no characters in certain rooms. So for instance, here in the locker room, Sarah starts here and then she has part of her scene here and she leaves. And presumably most players will follow her and see where she goes and see how she encounters Andrew. But you might think, well, wait a second, if I was to go into the locker room and wait for Sarah to leave, you're thinking about what might be there. So in each of the main AR scenes, there's one of these AR speakers, and while the characters are there in that space engaged in part of the story, there's music playing in the background from these speakers that kind of accompanies what they're doing. But after they've left, if you hang out with the speaker, you'll hear one of these speeches from Sergio Venturi, the CEO of the Venturis Corporation in the game. And it's something that I hope that players who either intentionally seek these out or just stumble upon one will have that spark of surprise at this extra thing being there and go back and see where else they can find more and really fill out the rest of the story's universe with these little hidden pieces that are kind of, under the surface of what's going on in the AR scenes.
Through this, I learned that relationship I had become accustomed to.
It's been quite a year, hasn't it? A year that constitutes the first step into this company's bright future. And you've been lucky enough to be an integral part of it. Venturis was founded by my grandfather, Arturo Venturi, over 80 years ago. A serendipitous trip to Singapore, paired with his singular vision for the future of space travel, laid the foundations, literally and figuratively, for the orbital economy as we know it today. Thanks to Venturis, the Ono space elevator linked man to the stars, the fountain of Paradise Spaceport, a bustling hub of commerce that brought a new era of prosperity to our planet. Built on the orbital economy that the space elevator made possible, Earth's technology continued to grow and advance in ways we'd never imagined.
This has been a message from your Chief Executive Officer, Sergio Venturi.
Through this, I learned that people do not. Through this, I learned. Through this, I learn that people... Through this, I learn...
Right in this area, there are multiple instances of, if this was just video recording, there would be, complete nudity
Right.
going on with Nat and Sarah in these situations. And so on the one hand, you're not directly confronted with that, but on the other hand, that means that the fact that you're kind of like being invasive in these private moments takes maybe a little bit longer to sink in.
Right. Once you figure that out, though, you're like, oh, what is this company doing?
Yeah.
And that is,
I find it interesting to give the player access to a lot of different elements of these characters' experience, including very private stuff that no one else is supposed to know, or that, only they think of themselves as having access to. And the AR figures give us the ability to put the player in the room in these situations in hopefully a way that kind of walks that line of being kind of uncomfortable when you think about it, but also not being so...
prurient.
Yeah, exactly. As it would have been if you were just standing there at the time.
It's less working blue, but hopefully still emotionally resonant.
From a level design perspective, why was Tacoma, why was the actual station built with so many angles in the first place?
Basically to make an interesting shape and sightline. That was like my intention. When I was doing the original grade blocks, everything was pretty squished together because, we were really emphasizing like keeping the station feeling compact and, small enough to be realistic in space,
Yeah. And then the wall models themselves are like, because they're angled on top of angles, so it means that the footprint of at the base, so the floor area is actually smaller than the ceiling at the top. So sometimes I would put the final meshes in and the top part of the wall would cut into like Clive's closet. And in level design and environment art, there's this idea of the grid being God.
Yeah.
And that whole area, like, we just totally ignored the grid, and we just, everything is just sort of bespokely created.
Yeah. It's funny because like I think the area is still like, it's cool to walk through, and Ops is one of the wings that I think we pulled off the like feeling compact on a space station theme the best. Because it really does feel like you're kind of in this constrained space. I mean, the gym is pretty open, but like this hallway with Clive's bunk and office, I do feel like it feels small and realistic. So despite the challenges of actually building it, I still feel like it's successful.
Lessons were learned.
Yeah.
So you were looking at what is now the lobby of the Zenith Lunar Resort on the surface of the moon, but that is not what the area depicted was originally made for.
Yeah, this was originally the main lobby of the station, where the visitors would come in and this would be the first thing they'd see.
In the original version of the game, Tacoma Station was a much more opulent. It was a customer-facing space, and still in our fiction, the richest of the rich are the people who do things like come up to the lunar resort. But partway through development, we realized that these big, opulent public spaces are kind of the antithesis of what our games are about, which is kind of getting into these dense, intimate spaces that tell you a lot about the people who lived in them.
Right, certainly, almost by definition, like a big public space, no matter how fancy and detailed, cannot be personal.
Yeah, I mean, it can tell you about the state of the world broadly, it can tell you about the function of the place, but you would have to go into the offices of the people who run the place and look at their workspaces and see their personal effects to really understand who they were. And so a big part of revisiting the core, kind of conceit of the game was to say, how do we make the station as a whole something that can tell you about who the people that live and work here every day really are?
No, Germler, I don't know why. All right, I mean, you know how I've always been. It's never real in my...
So there's a lot of QR codes in the game on various packages and communications and other things like that. And basically, I think we just chose them as a method for information storage just because they're so annoying. Nobody likes QR codes. It's totally the kind of choice that a big company like Venturis or any other of the big companies in the game would choose. And we also really liked the idea that the player could actually scan them and get additional information. Usually that's just ingredients or something, but occasionally there's some cute stuff in there. One of Clive's themes is kind of past glory or, glory days kind of thinking, because having jump ship from his first job, he now looks back on that being like, those were the good old days. And he looks back on his time in college similarly, and he has a lot of fiction that is, from the 60s in London. He has picked photos from old-timey
London town.
Londonton, and as no one calls it.
Yeah, he... I think he has a lot of nostalgia, and I think he has a lot of reminders of hopes. Well, and I think it's it's a way of depicting that he does want more for himself.
Yeah.
And so, something about Tacoma in general, I think, is that it's about a lot of people who are trapped in a situation, and it's a lot of different situations. It's about people's obligations and the friction between what they want and where they are and where they can actually get to from there. And being posted on Tacoma is not a great gig.
Right.
It's not glamorous. And I think Clive's version of that is spending a lot of time thinking back to when he had all the potential from his college football days and to the romantic glory days of old time London that he didn't actually get to live through. But it's like his idealistic picture of like where he would like to be. And so a lot of his bunk, I think, is a projection of that part of himself.
Yeah.
Poor Clive. Stupid Clive. Bye.